Hey everybody, this is Alex Merced from alexmerced.com, and I just want to make a video illustrating a balance sheet and sort of the buildup of a recession and an expansion from the point of view of a balance sheet. I think this will make it really easy to kind of see how these things happen and where the departure from sort of Keynesian and Austrian points of view occurs. Okay, so a balance sheet, if you don't know what a balance sheet is, it's an accounting thing. It's not like you're making up stuff, and though sometimes in normal everyday accounting you do kind of make up stuff. But the point of a balance sheet is to tell you what your financial position in a moment in time is. So what you would do is you would just take any moment in time, like right now, and on a piece of paper you would list everything that you own, your assets, or at least everything you have control over is under your name. Then put on the other side you put all your liabilities, everything you owe other people. And the idea is, if you took every asset that you owned and liquidated them at what you think their value is, paid off as much of your liabilities as possible, if you have any money left over, that's assets that you have that you truly have control over, that you really own. That's also known as your equity or your ownership. So the total value of all your assets should equal the value of your liabilities and equity put together. Now the typical individual balance sheet looks something like this, approximately. Okay, on the asset side you have a category called current assets. These are generally assets that are either cash or can turn into cash within the next year. So stocks would be liquid because you can sell stocks whenever you want. Then you'd have fixed assets. These are assets that are probably not as easy to turn into cash. You may not be able to sell within the next year. So things like cars, buildings, equipment, etc. And there is another category called intangibles. Won't get into that for this video. Now, as far as the money that you owe, you have your current liabilities. This is the money you owe over the next year. So this is your bills, any loan payments you have to make over this year, etc. And then your long-term liabilities, which let me correctly label that. This is money that you owe over years. This is all your student loans over the next year, next year and further, and mortgages, any other type of loan you may have. So here, the typical person maybe scrimps and saves some cash from their general work. And they may have a car to get to and from work. So here we say the person has saved $5,000 of cash, okay, over the years, and has a car that has a resale value of $5,000. So they reasonably have assets of $10,000. Now, if they were to liquidate that $10,000 worth of assets, the cash that they have in the bank account, the car that they have, and try to pay down everything that they owe, they wouldn't even be able to pay their bills for the year. Okay, because basically we're going to assume that their monthly, when we factor in rent, Netflix, all their monthly bills, that you're looking at maybe for the year bills worth $12,000. Now, again, this is a moment in time, so we're not factoring in all their other wage payments, their paychecks that they're going to get every couple weeks because they haven't gotten them yet. Although we could add them in there. So assuming this person makes $2,000 a month, okay, that we would put that as an account receivable, money that we haven't gotten yet, but it would be coming in within the year. We'll say 2,000 times 12, that'd be 24,000. So his salary, annual salary is 24,000. So we know 24,000 at this moment should be coming in within the next year. Let me take away that extra dollar sign. So we'll bump up his total assets to 34,000. That should look more reasonable now. So could pay their bills for the year. Okay, but they still have student loans, a student loan of over $25,000 that they owe. So overall they owe $37,000 in liabilities, which would bring their total equity down to a negative $3,000. So that means if they took everything that they own, took all their paycheck for the rest of the year, paid off everything that they owe, they'd still be in the whole $3,000. Now the reason why this is important is because when a bank looks to determine whether they want to lend you money or not, this is exactly what they look at, your balance sheet. Because the idea is, what if something really bad happens to you? Do you have enough? If you lose your job or you're in the disability, sorry for all the coughing, I'm a little bit ill. If the worst happens to you and you have to sell everything, what are you left with at the end of the day? And is there enough assets for you to pay the bank off? In this case, if you're looking for another loan, the bank's thinking you're not going to be able to pay them if you go bankrupt. So they either won't make you the loan, or they'll make you the loan at a high interest rate. So basically, the perception or the value or what's on a person or individual or a company or a government balance sheet highly determines their ability to have sort of financial nimbleness. Okay, but it's not only the quality of their balance sheet, but it also matters where their assets are. For example, if we took a lot more of this over here, the current assets, and a lot more of that was tied up in car and building, well, they could also have a problem, a liquidity problem, because they won't necessarily have assets that can turn into cash quickly enough. Okay? So all these different things are considerations that a bank makes, and this is important. So let's say later on, we're going to pretend it's like 2005, 2006, where you can get like a zero down mortgage. So you can buy a house without putting any money down. So what we're going to do is we're going to buy a house. Okay, so we're going to get it for $100,000, so it's a mortgage for $100,000. And we put no down payment on there. Okay, but now you have a house. Okay, a house worth $100,000. Okay, so that whole house was totally paid for in debt. Okay, so basically your equity is still $3,000 because you have a $100,000 house, $100,000 mortgage. Okay, so now this becomes 134. This becomes 137. So that's your balance sheet now. Now a couple years pass by and the house is now worth more. Now we'll assume that you've paid maybe $10,000 off the loan over the last couple years, so now you only owe $90,000 on the mortgage, and the house is now worth $150,000. Okay, so now your financial position has improved. So this is why it's important to acquire assets, because if you just own cash and your paycheck for your entire life, chances are you're not going to really build wealth very quickly, and chances are any wealth you do build won't be enjoyed by you but by your children, which is fine, but you do want to enjoy a little bit of your life. So you have to take some risk and own assets like houses and cars. Well, probably not cars, but you really need the car just to get around, not so much as an investment, but houses and other things that will rise in value to help build your wealth. So that way you can enjoy life a little bit. But at the same time, you'll see what happens. So now my financial position is a little bit better. So my assets are now 184 because it went up by 50,000. I paid off $10,000 of my liabilities, so now my liabilities are 127,000. So do a little quick math here. 84 minus 100, 84 by 60, 57. So now my equity is 57,000. Negative 57,000. Okay, and this is your typical individual. Your typical individual is in the hole there, which you call underwater, meaning the value of all their assets does not necessarily pay off everything that they own. And a lot of entities are like that, but you don't want to necessarily be too like that. While most companies and governments tend to be a little bit more positive. Well, maybe not governments, but most companies try to be in the positive area and try to, basically their goal is to take all the assets they have there to buy other assets that grow. And that should be the way you think about things too. It'll make your life better off. Okay? And like this keeps happening. So now let's say another couple years happens, you know, the house is now worth $350. So we add another $200,000 to the value of the house, so our assets go up to $384, and you pay off another maybe $40,000 worth of the mortgage, so now you're at $50,000. So you take this down by 40, we're now at $87,000. Okay, so you're looking really good. Okay, so you're looking at about 290. You're looking about equity, actually positive equity of 297. So $297,000 of positive equity. Now when a bank looks at you, they're like, yeah, we'll lend you all sorts of money. And again, we're pretending this back as 2005, 2006, when basically banks would be nuts. Like in a normal environment, a bank would look at that equity and they'd loan you some of that equity. And they would, because if you borrow all that money, then you're back to zero equity, which means the bank is back in a sort of a scary position. Because it's not only do you have enough equity now, do you have enough assets now to pay your bills, or another question that the bank has asked themselves is the assets that you own currently going to stay worth whatever they think it's worth. So in that case, that's why they never want to lend you the full value of their equity, of your equity, which is exactly what was happening in 2005, 2006. So let's say you do borrow against that equity. Okay, so let me shift everything down here. Okay, so you get an equity line of credit. Of all the equity that you have. So you borrow $297,000. Okay. So then you have to add all that up to get your new total liability. Push this down a little bit more. Well, let's say you use this money to buy exactly another $297,000 worth of stocks. Okay? Which would be a bad idea, but just to illustrate a point, $297,000, you now have a stock. So you have now a corresponding asset to go with that loan, because again, you always have to match up. So basically, if you borrow money from the bank, you'll either have a whole bunch of cash or a credit line, but you were going to say you already spent it on stocks. So you have now $297,000 in stocks. Okay, and that balances out. So now your total liability goes up, but your equity stays unchanged. Let's see, your 297 plus 87,000, 94, 303. So it'd be 383,000. I still want to bring this down a little bit. There we go. Okay. So now you become a lot wealthier than you were when we originally started this exercise. Okay, so life's good. Now you feel very positive. So in this case, you're feeling so positive about your assets, you keep shifting a lot of these liquid assets and borrowing against them to buy more houses, more stocks, etc., because everything's going up. Now what happens when the housing market crashes? Okay? Well, now your house is worth, oh, actually I didn't increase my total assets yet. Let me whip out the calculator for this one because my brain's trying to get a little worn from all the addition and subtraction. Okay. So 383 plus 297 equals 680. So you have $680,000 worth of assets. Okay. Now, what happens is now we're going to say that your house the housing market crashes and your house is now only worth $150,000. That sucks. Okay. So now your total assets is $400,000. Now the market suddenly gets worried about this, and the thing is that real estate at this point has become a big part of everyone's balance sheets because everyone saw how houses were going up. So basically, when you take a look at anyone's balance sheet, you see a lot of houses, whether they're individuals, businesses, etc. So everyone freaks out, and they need this, and they're worried about whether they're gonna have enough cash to pay their bills. But they can't sell their house because it's worth so little. It doesn't pay off the loan they had on the house. Okay, I mean in this case it does because we've paid down the loan a little bit, but a lot of times people have been borrowing. We can't sell the house at that price. So then people begin selling their stocks. So you sell $100,000 of your stock, $197,000. So now you're down to $380. The problem is when everybody does that, that pushes down the price of stocks. So then what happens is that your stock value drops by another $100,000, not because you sold it, but because the stock market fell. So everyone's selling off. So you're now at 280. Okay, and now once again, you are at a negative equity. So let's see here. We take your assets, 280,000 minus 383,000, and that'll equal 103,000. So you're now in the hole 103,000. Now you're much worse off than you were before. Okay, before you even own the house and all that stuff. Now, as long as you can pay your bills for the next year, your current liabilities, again, this is why it's important, not necessarily that equity number, but the composition of your balance sheet, because as long as you still have enough wages and whatnot coming in to pay off your current liabilities, all your bills for the year, life should be okay. But what if you had an adjustable rate mortgage and interest rates are going up, and now your monthly payments adjust up to $22,000 a year? Okay, life gets more difficult. So what happens to all this compound? So the question is, why did this happen? Now, there's a couple of different ways of looking at it. Now, from an Austrian economics point of view, the reason this happened is because as you were allocating your resources into these different assets, you did it wrong for whatever reason. Most likely some sort of bad economic signals. Maybe because the government was intervening in the economy through low interest rates, different tax rules, different subsidies, different ways that the government intervened in the market, sort of made certain investments look better than they actually were, and made certain investments look worse than they actually were. So instead of putting your money in the places that probably were the best, they weren't obviously the best because of these interventions. So you put your money in sort of in the wrong places. Austrians would refer. So it's not that you wouldn't have put your money somewhere; you just put the money in the wrong place. This is known as malinvestment. So in that case, when you realize that all your investments were not worth what you thought they were, and you borrowed more money than they were worth, now you're in a bad position. And the thing is, that's not only that you made the wrong investments yourself, like you bought the wrong things. It's also you may be the wrong person to buy them. Okay, you may buy a house and not necessarily use it to its best capability, and thus your investment doesn't pay off. So there's just a complete mismatch economically of assets and ownership and whatnot. Because at the end of the day, you may own the house, you may own a business, but you don't really own it. You just have control over it, as long as all the other pieces, and you can pay off all your lenders and maintain all the other pieces of people who can sort of attack that control. Now, from a Keynesian point of view, now what happened? The reason the house price started falling was because there were people weren't buying houses. Now, the reason that may happen is because maybe there was too many houses, whatever. But the problem is, again, when that house price fell, well, that caused you to sell your stocks, and when everyone sold their stocks at the same time, that caused their stock values to drop even more, which hurt them even more, and which then causes people to freak out even more, and it causes all your asset prices to start dropping, not to what they're necessarily worth, but below what they're actually worth. So now you're worse off than you actually should be. Okay? So from a Keynesian point of view, your balance sheet gets so bad, and now what happens is that your net balance sheet is so bad, you now have a negative sort of feeling, and you stop sort of spending money, you start saving money, and that's fine. You start saving money at the bank and whatnot. The problem is, the bank doesn't want to lend the money to anybody because everyone's balance sheet looks like this with a negative number there at the bottom. Okay, so then what happens is that everything else that's out there that people didn't normally want to buy, that there was sort of a sustainable demand for, well, because of the unsustainable demand in other assets that they owned that hurt their balance sheet position, now they can't buy the things they normally probably would be buying if they had made proper investments. In that case, those things that people do want no longer can be made. Those businesses have to close down, etc. And you just have this sort of really big contractionary event. That really sucks. And not only do you lose things that were sort of don't need to exist, but you also lose things that could sustainably exist. So in that case, what the Keynesian prescription is that the government give you cash or other assets, or try to improve your asset position. And the way they improve their asset position is by the government on their balance sheet taking on debt, so deficit spending from the Keynesian point of view. Okay, they take deficit spending and they just pass out cash to people with these bad balance sheet positions, so that way they can begin paying down their debts, so that way their balance sheet position gets to a better position, so that way they can begin borrowing from banks again, and then they can begin buying stuff again. And that way those sustainable investments can continue to go through. While at the same time, ideally you wouldn't necessarily have to, you would only try to wind down the bad investments and try to slow down the bleeding That's from a Keynesian point of view. So the stimulus idea is to take the bad stuff that needs to go, throw some money at it so people, not too many people lose their jobs, that the pain to the economy is not too much, and then give money to the people whose balance sheets are dragging on the economy, so that way they can improve their balance sheets, find new jobs, and start buying other assets that need to be bought. Okay, so that's sort of the Keynesian point of view. The Austrian point of view would be the government would do the opposite. Instead of increasing their liabilities in their balance sheet, okay, they would be decreasing the liabilities in their balance sheet and paying down their debt. So basically, not even necessarily increasing assets or increasing liabilities. They'd be trying to decrease both. The idea is to decrease the size of the government balance sheet, because the government's assets are taxation, how much it taxes you, which it takes from you, and its liabilities is money that it borrows from the pool of assets that can be borrowed. So the idea is that if the government shrinks its balance sheet, it's not borrowing as much money from the pool of capital that can be borrowed, and it's not taking as much money from you which you can spend, and there'll be much more resources from investment. Okay, for investment, more resources and maybe more flexibility in the economy too. It's not just reducing the size of government. It's not just about freeing those resources, but also about the policies, about no longer like subsidizing things, taxing certain things, playing with interest rates, and trying to free up those signals. That way, people can invest in the right places now. So instead of trying to help people get through their bad investments, so let people suffer from their mistakes, even though the mistakes aren't necessarily their fault. But the only way you can get back to sort of a sane market signals is if they do go through that pain. And that's sort of the Austrian point of view, or sort of like the libertarian Austrian point of view. Okay? Now at the end of the day, they both kind of agree on how we got here, so this whole balance sheet movement. But at the end of the day, they come to a difference on how you fix this sort of interchaining link of people, company, and government balance sheets that affect how the financial system works. Because again, not some selling of assets you get not because people really don't want their car or people can't afford their car. It's just that they get kind of scared. Okay, and what they do is they sell their assets so they can have more cash. This is what we call liquidity preference. Okay, so a lot of Austrians like to deny the existence of this concept. But there's two things. There's time preference, which is sort of the more Austrian idea, which is talking about when you want to buy stuff. Okay, so interest rates will move partly because maybe I want to buy stuff now or I want to buy stuff later. I don't really need stuff now. That's time preference. So when you actually want to buy stuff. Liquidity preference is not that you want to buy stuff now or later, is that you would like to have assets that are more liquid, that you can use to pay bills and whatnot more now. So maybe you do want that new car, but you're so worried about being able to pay your bills that instead you'd rather hold the cash. Now both of these different differences, or both of these different preferences that you have, and again there's lots of other preferences that individuals have. Okay, individuals have a pantheon. So any economist who tries to simplify it into only a handful of different preferences and say that it all occurs because of these two, three, or four different preferences that you have is oversimplifying it. There's all sorts of different considerations that you have. These are just two big ones that affect this particular composition, the composition of your balance sheet. So we take a look. So as liquidity and time preference changes, and people begin moving their assets more to cash, that becomes a problem because if everyone's when Keynes was talking about the paradox of thrift, he wasn't saying that nobody should save or anything like that. The point of his that, and this is a general rule in general, that when everybody does the same thing, it's not a good thing. Why? Because every transaction, like when you trade with somebody, the reason a trade works is because there's somebody on the opposite side. If you buy an apple, well, there's somebody who wants cash for an apple. If everybody was buying apples at the same time, there'd be nobody to buy apples from, and that'd be bad. Okay, so the idea is everybody saved money at the same time, there'd be no one to borrow money, and then those assets would stay not being used. There wouldn't be any investment. Okay, so that was Keynes was saying. He wasn't saying that necessarily. I mean, he wasn't a big fan of savings, and I disagree with him on that. I'm much a bigger fan of sort of the Austrian view on savings and capital formation, but just to kind of be accurate about sort of what everyone was saying, sort of in this conundrum. So when you hear Keynesians say a balance sheet recession, this is sort of what they were talking about and why they say the government needs to spend a bunch of money to improve people's balance sheets. Okay, when Austrians talk about malinvestment, again they're talking about the composition of the assets on a person's balance sheet, maybe being misvalued. So basically what happens is that you thought all your assets were worth a certain thing, they weren't, banks lent you based on these wrong assumptions as well. Now you got capital in all the wrong places, and now you got to sit there and figure out where it should be. Okay, because at the end of the day, all of us can work together and continue to work together more and more and more so, as long as the capital is moving to the right places. And the whole idea of private property rights and free markets allows us to help quantify and kind of measure if we're putting capital in the right places, and that's sort of the economic benefit of it. So hopefully this was interesting. My name is Alex Merced. You can learn more at those websites you see at the bottom, alexmerced.com and learneconomicsnow.com. Have a great day and enjoy.